Last year, I came across one of the most interesting and bizarre interpretations of magic I've ever seen in a work of fiction. The book Perdido Street Station by China Mieville is weird. Exceptionally weird. Cities built around the corpses of impossibly large monsters, beetle-headed women in deep romantic relationships with humans, godlike trans-dimensional spider artistes that go around playing with the weave of reality. That kind of weird. And the magic is no exception. Just not for the reasons you might expect. Instead of the traditional wizardry or sorcery or witchcraft, what they practice in the world of Baslog is thaumaturgy. It's a term I've seen crop up in tons of other fantasy stories as well, but Perdido Street Station was the first one that really gave me pause. Is thaumaturgy a different thing? Is there a reason we should call it that, and not just magic? Turns out, there is, and the book makes a really good case for it. It's not the most important part of the tale, but it is one of the more interesting bits. A big thanks to World Anvil for helping to make this video possible, and to all our Patreon supporters as well. We love you. In its original context, thaumaturgy really did just mean magic. It comes from a Greek word which means wonder-working, which was once applicable to the performance of any feat that couldn't be explained by what was, at the time, known of natural science. So, that's a very wide blanket. From there, the word just seems to be a synonym for wizardry or basically any other kind of magic. In his book Authentic Thaumaturgy, the author Isaac Bonewitz distinguishes it from what he calls theurgy, which has more to do with divinity and the soul. So that means thaumaturgy is any magic that doesn't come from a supernatural source? I guess that's sort of serviceable, but it doesn't really seem to be what the majority of authors mean when they use the term. To them, whether they realize it or not, it seems to have something to do with the strange intersection of magic and science. For example, in Terry Pratchett's Discworld, the basic unit of magic is called a thaum, which is defined as the amount of magic needed to create a white pigeon or 3 billiard balls. Not what I would call overtly rational, but still very systematic. In the game Elder Scrolls II Daggerfall, thaumaturgy is a character skill defined as a focus on manipulating known forces and objects within their natural laws. A little more precise, and I think this definition cuts a little closer to the quick as well. But, as I said, it wasn't until I read Perdido Street Station that I really started to notice this. One of the story's protagonists, Isaac, is a scientist who used to study at the University of New Crobuzon, where thaumaturgy is not only a practice, but a field of scientific research with practical application. The thaumaturgists who learn these skills are put to work in every part of society, from engineering all the way down to corporal punishment. Isaac himself is a dilettante genius who wanders from theory to theory, trying to understand parts of thaumaturgy people haven't yet bothered to explore, things that still look magical despite the fact that we're seeing magic in an academic setting. His ramblings about theories and philosophies feel so much more like the musings of a modern essayist than a mage in a high fantasy story. And it's this feeling that I'm trying to understand. Magic made oddly rational, systematized, but still enchanting. So I dug a little deeper into the history of thaumaturgy, and what I found makes a lot of sense. Around the turn of the 16th century in Western Europe, science as a common practice was entering into the social consciousness. No longer was it strictly the realm of Latin speakers and the extremely wealthy. Anyone who was able to get their hands on printed or written materials about developing scientific ideals would be able to, in some capacity, engage. Well, I say science, but it was still quite a bit rougher than that. They usually just called what they were doing mathematics, or more poetically, the art. Don't forget, alchemy was still alive and well during this period, and many, if not most, of these early scientists engaged in it side by side with more practical studies. And this is where we come to what may be the first anglicized form of the word, thaumaturgy. In his book Mathematical Preface to Euclid's Elements, the famous polymath John Dee discusses an art mathematical called thaumaturgy, which, in his words, giveth certain order to make strange works, of the sense to be perceived and of men greatly to be wondered at. Essentially, thaumaturgy was, to him, the science that makes really weird stuff happen. Wonderworking, after a fashion. And this sentiment wasn't unique to Dee. Around this time you see phrases like mathematical magics and mechanical wizardry, often used to describe the fabled works of Archimedes and Daedalus. There was a certain general understanding that they were tapping into something quite powerful and quite wondrous. They just didn't really know how to talk about it. Some segment of the lay population has always been very wary of new technologies and sciences. The employment of mathematics to create complex contraptions like automata and simulacra had long drawn suspicion before this point in history. Uneducated audiences unable to see how else they could be fabricated, but with the help of devils and demons. So, practitioners of the so-called art were very often derided as conjurers and suffered a lot of infamy as a result. In 1583, a mob broke into and destroyed John Dee's fine library, including much of his thaumaturgic apparatus. We even see these sentiments borne out in Goethe's famous Faustus, where, upon making a deal with the devil, the protagonist doesn't don a black robe and start weaving evil enchantments. Rather, he becomes the most famous mathematician that lived in his time. How sinister. You'd think the fact that early scientific resources were becoming more accessible would help the situation. People would be able to read the abstracts for themselves and see that it's not demons and devils behind all of this, and hopefully calm down a little bit. But the opposite sort of happened. Part of the reason people were so upset to begin with was because practitioners like John Dee spoke in such high terms about their thaumaturgical art. Even simple things like levers and mirrors were made to sound like magic wands and crystal balls. Here, listen to what Dee says about numbers. They are, according to him, the means by which one might arise, climb, ascend, and mount up with speculative wings in spirit to behold the glass of creation, the form of forms, the exemplar number of all things numerable, both visible and invisible, mortal and immortal, corporeal and spiritual. So, yeah, I can understand why people were a little confused. It also doesn't help that John Dee was very much a mystic and believed he was constantly surrounded by invisible spirits, but that's neither here nor there. The point is that the thaumaturgy all these people were engaging in was really just misunderstood science. In the words of Arthur C. Clarke, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. We usually hear this maxim in the context of sci-fi, but I think all of this proves that it can work just as well in fantasy. Some magic systems depend on theurgy, and the divine is usually, by nature, impossible to fully comprehend, supernatural. Other systems treat their magic as numinous and unquantifiable, impossible to source. The thing that defines it is that it's an elusive part of nature that can never be rationalized. But thaumaturgy is different. This is magic that has nuts and bolts. You might not be able to see it at first glance, but when you boil it down, it's just science. Perhaps science different from what we have in the real world. The setting may have different natural laws, but within that context, yes, science. If the history of thaumaturgy proves anything, it's that magic can abide in a world where, in the end, everything is technically subject to natural laws. It just requires that some people don't quite understand how things work, or believe that some things that are happening are impossible. Where that's the case, no matter how scientifically sound it is, you have yourself magic. Or at the very least, something indistinguishable from it. This is the thing I love so much about the magic of Perdido Street Station. It just isn't magic. At least, not to the denizens of that world. And even in the places where it kind of is, the protagonist is hell-bent on rendering it rational and scientific in some capacity, which he genuinely seems able to do. Everything in this world can be demystified. It's an interesting precedent to set for your world, one which really changes the tone of the stories you tell in it. If you find yourself writing a lot of vague magicomancy in your works, this could certainly be worth a try. Of course, you don't actually have to invent an entire secondary world science for people to wonder confusedly at for it to work. You just have to suggest that behind the arcs of actinic lightning, there's a thumb or two of rationality at work. When I come across an idea like this, I like to find some way to try it out if I can, but there's a lot that goes into a good story beyond the writing and the method. A lot of planning. It can be a drag if you're just trying to get to the execution, but World Anvil can help lighten the load. World Anvil is a browser-based world-building platform designed for writers, novelists, tabletop game masters, game developers, anyone who has a world in their head that needs building. With tools for linking together your content like a wiki, creating interactive maps, timelines, and family trees, and options for choosing who to share all of it with, World Anvil will keep your creations safe, well-organized, and easy to share with your players and fans. And that's just the world-building side of it. Now you can even use the platform's new novel writing software to write, plan, plot, and shockingly, even publish your stories. As in publish for money. The real deal. Go to worldanvil.com/talefoundry to sign up for free. And if you want to join the guild there, which will unlock a veritable arsenal of amazing features like comprehensive privacy settings, presentation options, and so much more, you can use the code TALEFOUNDRY to save up to 30% on an annual membership. Again, that's worldanvil.com/talefoundry, and the code, of course, is TALEFOUNDRY. Go light up the forge. Before we wrap up, I'd like to give a quick thanks to all the helpful humans who support the show on Patreon. All those words you see scrolling in the background of these videos? Those are actually the names of our Patreon maintenance crew, without whom this show would be impossible. And a special word to all of our top patrons, Lord Gate, RPG Grenade, and the Autumn Rider, thank you so much. And that's it for now. There's usually a few weeks between uploads, so if you want more Tale Foundry in the meantime, come join our community. We have a Discord server that's basically like a big family of creatives, a lot of love there. We also run writing groups on Twitch every week if you want to get some practice in. You can find links to all of it in the description. Hope to see you there. Until then, thanks for watching and keep making stuff up. I'll see you next time. Bye!